Right now, as you're watching this video, America's power grid is one equipment failure away from collapsing. And when it does, millions could be left in the dark for days, weeks, or even months. In this video, we're revealing the 10 states most at risk of catastrophic blackouts in the coming months. We'll expose why decades-old infrastructure, extreme weather, and skyrocketing demand are creating a perfect storm that threatens not just individual states, but the entire nation. And most importantly, we'll show you why this crisis could reach your doorstep sooner than you think. Welcome to Pantry, where we help you stay informed and prepared for what's coming. If you want to protect yourself and your family from the chaos ahead, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss critical information that could save your life. Let's start with something most Americans don't realize. The power grid keeping your lights on, your food cold, and your devices charged was built for a completely different era. We're talking about transmission lines, substations, and power plants that were designed decades ago when the country had fewer people, less technology, and predictable weather patterns. Today, that same grid is being pushed to its absolute limits. Population growth means more homes and businesses demanding electricity. Technology expansion means data centers, cryptocurrency mining operations, and electric vehicles consuming massive amounts of power. And climate change means the extreme weather events that used to be rare are now becoming routine. When the grid fails, the consequences are immediate and devastating. Communication systems go down, food in refrigerators and freezers spoils within hours, air conditioning stops working during deadly heat waves, medical equipment shuts off. Essentially, modern life grinds to a complete halt. We've already seen the warning signs and we've ignored them. Remember the 2003 Northeast blackout? A simple equipment failure left 50 million people in the dark. Or how about Texas in February 2021? A winter storm exposed catastrophic flaws in the state's isolated grid, leaving millions without power for days while temperatures plummeted. People died, pipes burst, entire communities were left helpless. These aren't isolated incidents anymore. Rolling blackouts and power failures are becoming the new normal across America. And here's what makes it even more dangerous. Our power grid is interconnected. When one state system fails, it can trigger a domino effect that brings down entire regions. A problem in Texas doesn't stay in Texas. A failure in New York can ripple across the Northeast. We're all vulnerable because we're all connected. Three critical threats are converging right now to create this crisis. First, the infrastructure itself is ancient. We're running transmission lines and power plants that are operating decades beyond their intended lifespan. They're held together with duct tape and prayers at this point. Second, extreme weather events are intensifying and becoming more frequent. Heat waves are hotter. Winter storms are more severe. Wildfires are larger and more destructive. Hurricanes are stronger. The grid was never designed to handle this level of stress. Third, demand is exploding faster than anyone predicted. Data centers are popping up everywhere, consuming as much electricity as small cities. Cryptocurrency mining operations are devouring power. New manufacturing facilities are coming online. Population is booming in certain regions, and the grid simply cannot keep up. Now, let's talk about the 10 states living on borrowed time. These are the places where all the warning signs are flashing red, where one bad day could leave millions in the dark. Nevada is gambling with power, and the House might not win this time. Las Vegas, the entertainment capital of the world, is facing explosive electricity demand from data centers, cryptocurrency mining operations, and a rapidly growing population. The problem? Most of Nevada's power comes from aging natural gas and coal plants that are barely holding on. The state has been pushing into renewable energy, but there's a massive problem: insufficient battery storage. Solar panels generate plenty of power when the sun is shining, but they're useless when the sun goes down and demand peaks in the evening. Nevada relies heavily on importing power from neighboring states, which creates a fragile dependency. If a single major transmission line fails, or if a multi-state heat wave stretches everyone's resources thin, Nevada could be plunged into darkness. And while the big casinos have backup generators, most residents are left crossing their fingers every summer. Arizona is living on the edge, quite literally. Phoenix and Tucson are voracious consumers of electricity, because air conditioning isn't a luxury there, it's a matter of survival. The state has embraced solar power more than most, but they're running into what's called the duck curve problem. Solar generation peaks during the day when demand is moderate, then drops off in the evening when demand spikes. Grid operators are constantly scrambling to fill that gap. But there's an even bigger threat: Water scarcity. Many of Arizona's power plants rely on water for cooling, but the Colorado River is drying up. During extreme heat waves, when power is needed most, plants might have to shut down because there's not enough water to keep them running. Add to that transmission lines crossing the desert that are constantly battered by extreme heat, dust storms, and monsoons, and you've got a recipe for disaster. A single failure during peak demand could leave entire cities in life-threatening darkness. New Mexico's grid is like an old pickup truck that's been reliable for years but is now showing its age. The state depends on aging natural gas and coal plants, and rural areas are especially vulnerable because they're served by long, isolated transmission lines. When something breaks in the middle of nowhere, repairs are slow and expensive. Energy demand is rising fast, driven by massive oil and gas operations in the Permian Basin. Utilities are stretched thin, trying to serve both residential customers and the energy industry. Renewable development is happening, but it's slow and transmission capacity is limited. When severe weather hits or the sun goes down, large parts of the state can lose power for days. Utah is experiencing a population boom that's completely outpacing its infrastructure. Data centers are moving in, manufacturing is expanding, and electricity demand is soaring. The state has historically relied on coal, but many plants are scheduled for retirement. The transition to natural gas and renewable energy is lagging far behind demand. Winter is Utah's Achilles heel. When cold snaps hit, electricity use spikes for heating, just as natural gas supplies are stretched thin. Power plants end up competing with homes for the same fuel. The mountainous terrain makes transmission lines vulnerable to storms and equipment failures, and when something breaks in a remote area, it can take days or even weeks to fix. Renewable energy is growing, but without adequate battery storage, the state can't count on it when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. Wyoming produces vast amounts of energy, but here's the irony: most of it gets exported to other states. Wyoming's own grid is aging and fragile, originally built to serve mining operations rather than modern needs. Winter weather there is absolutely brutal. Blizzards and ice storms regularly knock out power lines, and many communities rely on single transmission lines. That means one failure can leave thousands of people in the dark. Wind energy is booming in Wyoming, but wind is intermittent. When it's not blowing, the power isn't there. Transmission lines built in the 1970s and 80s are reaching the end of their lifespan, and replacing them across Wyoming's vast distances is incredibly costly and slow. When equipment fails in remote areas, repair crews face harsh conditions and long, dangerous journeys just to reach the problem. Montana's grid is a patchwork system serving scattered communities across a massive geographic area. Mining operations and data centers are devouring electricity, and grid operators are constantly juggling supply and demand. The state's legendary weather, ice storms, wildfires, thunderstorms, and blizzards regularly damages infrastructure. Rural areas suffer the most, dealing with aging equipment and slow repairs. Montana has traditionally relied on hydroelectric power for stability, but drought and changing precipitation patterns are making even water power unreliable. What was once a dependable resource is now a wild card thanks to climate change. Colorado's rapid growth has completely overwhelmed its grid. Tech companies, data centers, and new residents are flooding cities like Denver and Boulder, outpacing utilities' ability to build new generation and transmission capacity. The Rocky Mountains separate population centers from energy resources, which complicates everything. Wildfire season used to be a summer thing. Now it's a year-round threat. Utilities are forced to shut off power during high-risk conditions to prevent their equipment from sparking blazes. That means customers are left in the dark as a precaution. Colorado has aggressive renewable energy mandates, which sounds great, but coal plants are being retired faster than reliable alternatives can be built. Battery storage is growing, but remains nowhere near sufficient for extended periods when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. Winter brings additional stress. Natural gas infrastructure struggles during cold snaps, with power plants competing against heating needs. This drives up prices and threatens grid stability right when people need power most. New York's grid is a complex web of aging transmission lines, overloaded substations, and power plants operating well beyond their intended lifespan. New York City alone consumes more electricity than entire states. During summer heat waves, the grid is pushed to its absolute limits. The 2003 blackout should have been a wake-up call. A simple equipment failure left 50 million people in the dark, proving just how fragile the system really is.
New York has ambitious climate goals, which means nuclear and fossil fuel plants are being shut down in favor of renewables. But building new infrastructure takes time, and demand doesn't wait. The transmission lines connecting New York City to upstate power plants are particularly vulnerable. They're operating at maximum capacity during peak periods, which means there's zero margin for error.
And there's a new threat emerging: cybersecurity. The grid is increasingly digital and connected to the internet, which makes it a target. A successful cyber attack could cause catastrophic outages lasting weeks or even months. California's grid has become infamous for all the wrong reasons. Rolling blackouts, wildfire shutoffs, and soaring electricity costs are now just part of life. The state pioneered renewable energy, but it's also pioneered new ways for power systems to fail. Wildfires, often sparked by utility equipment, have devastated entire communities and forced utilities to shut off power during high-risk conditions. The duck curve problem is acute in California. Solar generation peaks during the day, but demand peaks in the evening. The state has to either waste renewable energy or import expensive power from neighboring states, both of which stress the grid. Transmission infrastructure is aging and vulnerable to wildfires, extreme weather, and equipment failures. Energy storage is growing, but it's still inadequate for extended periods when renewable generation is low. When demand stays high and generation drops, California has to fire up expensive natural gas plants or import even more power, straining the system further. New transmission projects are desperately needed, but they're hampered by environmental reviews and local opposition. Progress is measured in decades, not years. And then there's Texas. The Lone Star State stands alone, literally. Its grid, called ERCOT, is isolated from the rest of the country. That means when disaster strikes, help isn't coming. The February 2021 winter storm was a preview of what's to come. Millions were left without power for days as temperatures plummeted. People froze to death in their homes. The state's infrastructure completely failed. Texas has a deregulated energy market that prioritizes cheap power over reliability. Energy companies focus on short-term profits instead of long-term infrastructure needs. Summer heat domes push demand to record highs every year, and ERCOT regularly issues conservation appeals, basically begging residents to use less electricity to avoid blackouts. The state is betting heavily on renewable energy, but wind and solar are intermittent. When they're not producing, something else has to fill the gap. Transmission lines connecting wind farms to major cities are overloaded, and failures ripple across the entire state. Natural gas plants are supposed to be the backup, but they're vulnerable to the same extreme weather that knocks out renewables. Population growth is explosive. Data centers are moving in. Cryptocurrency mining is expanding. Manufacturing is booming. Demand is rising faster than generation capacity can keep up. And cybersecurity risks are growing as the grid becomes more connected to the internet. A successful attack during a heat wave or major storm could cause catastrophic, prolonged outages. Texas's massive oil and gas industry adds another layer of risk. Refineries and petrochemical plants consume enormous amounts of electricity. When they shut down during emergencies, fuel supplies across the entire country are disrupted. Hurricanes threaten coastal infrastructure, and climate change is making those storms stronger and more predictable. Despite constant talk of reforms after the 2021 disaster, progress has been slow and often more cosmetic than substantive. Texas's grid problems are massive, and the state's isolation from the national grid makes every single issue worse. There's no backup, there's no safety net. Understanding these 10 states is critical, but here's what really should keep you up at night. The American power grid is interconnected. A major failure in Texas or New York doesn't stay contained. It can ripple outward, triggering cascading outages across entire regions. Experts are warning that without significant upgrades, the risk of regional or even national grid collapse is growing every single day. When the power fails, the consequences extend far beyond inconvenience. People die, especially the elderly, the sick, and young children. Businesses shut down, sometimes permanently. Hospitals struggle to keep life-saving equipment running on backup generators that might last hours or days, not weeks. Water treatment plants fail, creating public health emergencies. Food supply chains break down. Communication systems go dark. Communities that were thriving can be reduced to survival mode in a matter of hours. Climate change is accelerating all of this. Heat waves are getting hotter and lasting longer. Storms are becoming more severe and more frequent. Wildfires are larger and more destructive than ever before. Hurricanes are intensifying. The power grid was designed for the climate of 50 years ago. It can't handle what's happening now, and it definitely can't handle what's coming. Faced with increasingly unreliable service, many households are taking matters into their own hands. Solar panels, home batteries, and backup generators are becoming more common, especially among those who can afford them. These families
families are essentially creating their own mini-grids to protect themselves when the main grid fails. But there's a hidden problem with this solution. As more people disconnect or reduce their reliance on the main grid, utilities lose customers and revenue, but their costs for maintaining the infrastructure don't go down.
They still have to maintain all those transmission lines and power plants, so those costs get spread over fewer and fewer customers, meaning electricity bills go up for everyone who remains fully dependent on the grid. This creates a dangerous divide. Wealthier households can afford to buy their own resilience with solar panels, batteries, and generators. They'll be fine when the power goes out, but lower-income households are left completely vulnerable, dealing with unreliable service and rising costs. The gap between those who can weather the crisis and those who can't is growing wider every day. The solutions to America's grid crisis aren't mysterious. We know what needs to be done. Smart grid technology can optimize power distribution and reduce waste. Better regional cooperation can help states share resources during emergencies. Massive infrastructure investment can upgrade aging transmission lines and power plants. Expanding energy storage can make renewable energy more reliable. Hardening systems against extreme weather can prevent failures. Improving cybersecurity can protect against digital attacks. Training a new generation of skilled workers can ensure we can maintain and repair the grid. All of this is possible. Other countries are modernizing their power systems and leaving the United States behind. But progress here is painfully slow, hampered by political gridlock, regulatory hurdles, and the constant challenge of funding. Nobody wants to pay for infrastructure until after disaster strikes, and by then it's too late. Without urgent action, the United States risks falling further and further behind. The 10 states we've discussed are warning signs of a much larger national crisis. Blackouts aren't just likely anymore, they're inevitable. The only questions are how severe they'll be, how long they'll last, and how many people will suffer before political leaders finally take decisive action. So there you have it, 10 states on the brink of catastrophic blackouts, a power grid built for the past struggling desperately with the present, and a crisis that could reach every corner of America. From Nevada's gambling district to New York's sprawling metropolis, from Texas's isolated grid to California's wildfire zones, the warning signs are flashing red everywhere you look. The question isn't if major blackouts will happen, the question is when. And whether you're in one of these 10 states or not, the interconnected nature of our power system means you need to be prepared. This isn't fear-mongering, this is reality, based on infrastructure data, energy demand projections, and the clear pattern of failures we've already witnessed. Don't wait until you're sitting in the dark to take action. Subscribe to Prep Pantry and hit that notification bell so you're always ahead of the crisis. Check out our other videos on emergency preparedness, food storage, and survival strategies that can help protect you and your family when the grid fails. Drop a comment below and tell us which state you're in and whether you've already experienced power issues. Your story could help others prepare and understand what they're facing. The more we share information, the better prepared we all become. Stay safe, stay informed, and remember, preparation today prevents panic tomorrow. We'll see you in the next video.